Hello everyone, my name is Anuj Kumar Prajapati and I welcome you to the lecture number 2 of this video series on strength of materials. In this lecture, we shall have a quick look over the aim, assumptions and certain prerequisites required for the subject. But before that, let us note down some very important points uh, from the previous lecture. Firstly, the stress developed in a component is defined as the ratio of the internal resistive forces and the area of cross section. Now, these internal resistive forces are a direct result of the loading conditions. Now we saw that these stresses will lead to some strain, and strain is defined as the ratio of the change in dimension to the original dimension. And when I say dimension, it can be either the length, the area of cross section or even the volume. Next, we saw a point PL or the proportionality limit. It is defined as the point up to which the Hooke's law is valid. And what we mean by that is essentially there is a linear relationship between the stress and strain. Next, we saw the point EL or the elastic limit, which is the point up to which we can observe perfect elastic behavior. And by that I mean there will be absolutely no plastic or permanent deformation. So it essentially means that if you have applied some load and the stresses and strains developed are within this region, then as soon as the loads are removed, you will regain, the body will regain its original shape and size. And if you observe this stress strain diagram, the constant slope up to the point PL is just nothing but the Young's modulus. And this is the linear relationship that we talked about in the Hooke's law. I hope you remember the thought experiment we did using bread loaf. The only reason I used that example is because it is easy to visualize. In fact, some of you might even have tried it at your home, pressing a packet of bread with your bare hands. And similarly, you can also try to deform a piece of eraser, which is actually made up of a material called rubber. In both the cases, when you apply pressure with your bare hands, you will see some deformation. You will see there is some change in its dimensions. And as soon as you keep the object aside, it will regain its original shape and size. Now, what if I tell you that a similar feat can be achieved using a piece of iron, or let's say here mild steel? And trust me, iron or steel also behaves in the same way. But then why don't you see any such deformation when you are trying to press upon a piece of iron or steel? The answer lies in the elastic properties. The stresses or forces required to produce any visible or appreciable deformation in steel is quite high, and it cannot be achieved using your bare hands. For that, you need either a hydraulic press or a universal testing machine that you might have seen in your labs. If you observe the stress strain characteristics of rubber, aluminium, mild steel, and a rigid body, you'll see that the slope, which actually is the Young's modulus, is very less for rubber and the highest for a rigid body. In fact, it is infinite for a rigid body. By the way, We are assuming here that the stresses produced in all these four materials are well below the proportionality limit. And we can see from this graph that for a given amount of stress, the deformation is maximum in rubber and it is absolutely zero in a rigid body. Also, you can see that the deformation in mild steel is quite less as compared to rubber, but it is not zero. And what it actually means is that at some point in your life, you might have tried and succeeded in deforming steel, but the change in dimensions were so small that you could not see it with your naked eyes. And therefore, we can conclude that in comparison to rubber, steel is in some way a rigid material. And this is the reason when we are dealing in mechanics, we often assume members made up of steel and other materials as a rigid body. Now, remember, strains were of two types, longitudinal and lateral. The longitudinal strain was in the direction of the load, and the lateral strain was in a direction perpendicular to the load. Now, since we deal with three dimensions, we can say that every direction will have corresponding two more directions such that they form a triad of mutually perpendicular directions. Therefore, we can say that every longitudinal strain will be accompanied by two lateral strains. Now, this is a very important point which we shall use in future. Whenever we study something, there must be a reason behind it. When you study a subject, there has to be some motivation or some aim uh, as of why you are actually doing it. Otherwise, you're basically just mugging up a bunch of definitions and formulae. In strength of material, the keyword being strength, if you were to guess, you would say it basically tells us how durable a material or a component is. And it is actually correct to some extent. Any component, be it under an experiment or in actual service, will have certain limitations in terms of loading. There will be a limit beyond which, if the component or the member is loaded, it will fail. But what does failing mean? Well, some might say that a component is said to fail if the deformation exceeds 1 centimeter, while some may say that I will consider the component to fail if there is a neck formation, while some might demand the component is failing only when there is a visible and complete fracture. Therefore, to address this subjective and broad term, we shall define failure as being unable to perform the required function satisfactorily. This keyword satisfactorily, it gives power to the designer. It enables the user or designer to define their own criteria of failure. In this subject, our goal will be to derive expressions for stress, strain, etc. under the influence of set loading conditions using the experimentally obtained values for the elastic properties such as Young's modulus, Poisson's ratio, etc. But in my opinion, deriving these expressions alone don't have any use. You have to apply these equations somewhere. So the next step would be to develop a plan of selecting the appropriate shape, dimension, and the material using the above derived equations. And at the end, we shall also select a manufacturing process such that the resulting component is able to perform the function satisfactorily. That is, the material or I mean the component does not fail while in service. But one would say, isn't that machine designing? And yes, this is in fact machine designing. And SOM and machine design are in fact very related subjects in the sense that they use the exact same equations. But there is a small difference. The difference is in the approach we use these expressions. In strength of materials, you have the loading conditions, you already have the dimensions predefined, and your job is to calculate the stresses induced in the members. But in case of machine design, you are given the loading conditions as well as the permissible stresses in the material, but you don't know the dimensions, and that's what you calculate. And a major part of designing is all about determining the minimum dimensions using which you design your product and it does not fail under the given loading conditions. And at the same time, the dimensions should not be so large that the overall product becomes bulky, because it will add to the cost. Now let us have a quick look at some of the assumptions that we make in this subject. In the last lecture, we saw that perfect or ideal characteristics simply do not exist. And if you are designing assuming these perfections, you will be in for a surprise. Therefore, to simplify this process of design and calculation, we make certain assumptions, and to take care of these assumptions, we ultimately use a factor of safety later in the process. Now, these assumptions are: firstly, we assume that the material with which we are designing is homogeneous and isotropic. Second, the material obeys Hooke's law. Third, the member or component is prismatic. Fourth, the loads which are acting on the component are static. Fifth, the self weight is neglected. And the sixth is that the given component or member is in static equilibrium. Some of these assumptions are really easy to understand. For example, obeying Hooke's law simply means that the stresses are well within the proportionality limit, and these stresses are tightly proportional to the longitudinal strain. Prismatic means that the area of cross section is constant, and static load means the loading conditions are not varying with time. And we also assume that the externally applied loads are so large as compared to the weight of the member, then the weight can be neglected. Now let us try to understand what does homogeneous and isotropic mean. Consider a body and let us consider a few points on it. Now select a particular direction in random and observe the elastic properties in these directions. Let us say we are observing the Young's modulus and we name these EA, EB and EC. Now if these three values are same, then we can say that the material is homogeneous. That means the elastic properties in a given direction at various points is same. If that's not the case, we say that the material is non-homogeneous. Now, isotropic has something to do with the direction. Consider any one point on the body and observe the elastic properties in three mutually perpendicular directions. And if these properties are same, let us just say the Young's modulus Ex, Ey and Ez along three perpendicular directions are same, then you can say that this material is isotropic, failing which the material will be classified as anisotropic. Now, it's not necessary that every homogeneous material is an isotropic or every isotropic material is homogeneous. So there might be cases where a given material is homogeneous but not isotropic. There might be a second case where the material is non-homogeneous but isotropic. Third case where the material is neither homogeneous nor isotropic. And there is this fourth case, which is our area of focus, where the material is both homogeneous and isotropic. Now we should assume that most of the materials that we are dealing with fall into this fourth category. Now that we are done with the assumptions, let us have a quick look over the prerequisites required for this subject. And all these topics you might have studied in the subject called as engineering mechanics. But even if you haven't, you need not worry, because we will have a quick overview of these topics. So the first one is resolution of forces. Next is free body diagram or FBD. Third is the static equilibrium. Fourth is centroid and moment of inertia. And fifth is types of support and calculation of reactions. Now, to understand some of these topics, let us consider a small example. Suppose you have a block resting on a surface as shown. Let this block have a mass m and a force acting as shown in the figure. Now, if you ask a layman what are the forces acting on this block, he would say the most obvious thing, that there is only one force acting, and that is the force F. But you are a mechanical engineer. You are expected to analyze things differently and see things that are not so obvious. For this, we have a tool called the free body diagram. In simple words, free body diagram or FBD is the representation of all the forces acting on an isolated body. So there will be the force F, which was acting earlier. There will be a frictional force, the weight of the block, and the normal reaction provided by the surface. Now, to understand the overall combined effect of these forces and moments, if any are present, we shall calculate the net forces in the x and y direction and the moment about say a point A. This is done by summing up the individual forces and moments in a particular direction. Now this force F may not always be horizontal. It might get complicated. It's not necessary that it will always be aligned to one of the x or y axis and make our calculation easier. Suppose in this case it is aligned to the horizontal with an angle theta. So to simplify this process of calculating the net force in x and y direction, we shall make use of something called as the resolution of forces. Now, force being a vector can be resolved into its x and y components. Here, the force can be resolved as f cos theta and f sin theta in the x and y directions respectively. And yes, in 3D it would have x, y and z components, but here we are dealing with only a 2D problem, so we are resolving only in the x and y directions, and that should suffice. Now we didn't really specify or describe the motion of this block. It might be accelerating or decelerating, it might have a constant velocity, or it might have a special case of constant velocity, that is, it might be stationary or have a zero velocity. In the last two cases, where the block is not accelerating, by Newton's second law of motion we can say that there is no external unbalanced force acting on it. And when I say that the velocity is constant, I am describing both the linear as well as the rotational velocity, and therefore the expressions for the net forces in the x and y direction and the net moment about a given point will all be equal to 0. Now, this is an equilibrium condition. Along with it, if the body is actually stationary, then the condition is known as static equilibrium. So now we have covered static equilibrium, resolution of forces, and the free body diagram. In the next lecture, we shall have a quick look at the centroid, the moment of inertia, types of supports, and calculation of reactions. If you have any doubts in any of these topics, feel free to drop a comment and I shall try to clear them in the subsequent videos. Thank you.